yes, it was true that the issue of a precise class compositional analysis of the working class in the United States was not thoroughly done. And this has been a source of criticism in many different places. The idea that the working class fights on the level of debt and interest, that has been brought into question and has been attacked. That there is, that this notion that the class struggle is the source of crisis, causes crises for capitalism. This has been put into question. Some very interesting commentary by comrades have said, well, in general that might be true, but promissory notes has not really put its finger on the exact causal line between class struggle and crisis. And there is a lot of criticism from the comrades, especially in Germany, about our so-called romanticism. This seems to be a common critical word, romantic, that we're very romantic about the commons when the real developments in this period of time is the global proletarianization of the working class. That now, in fact, there's no going back to any commons. In fact, we are now stuck in this final struggle where every part of the working class is in a wage relationship. Now, these are just some of the comments that and criticisms that I received in going around and being involved in many, many discussions. And it's been very fruitful, and as a vehicle, it's created some of the conditions for verification or falsification of our hypotheses. And I think, and as I look around this hall now, I'm very excited, because I see in this hall a possibility of going ahead. The crisis does not necessarily mean the death of the patient. The question of how we go ahead is really vital and important. And I hope, and not only hope with the Zapatistas, but also see that there's a concrete need for a political terrain that we can create here in our part of the world, here in New York City and in other connected places, that could create a political site of discussion, not just an analysis, but a politics. And a way of expressing it, journal, or some similar type of vehicle of political expression. I think this is important, and I'd like to resolve the crisis of midnight nights, either death or let's go on.
Can you all hear me? I'm Jenna Loyd. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you about prisons in relation to crisis, prisons as crisis. I've just returned from a 2-month trip through the U.S. South and Southwest, driving around the country and talking with organizers, primarily in the immigrant justice movement, about conditions of detention, about the growth of detention centers as the sort of latest round of prison expansion and the fastest growing round of prison expansion, and about what's going on and the extent to which, one of my big questions is the extent to which prison abolition movements and immigrant justice movements are recognizing each other's work in common. Who is recognizing that, who is not, what's going on the ground. So hopefully I'll try and pull this together. Like I say, I was on the road 2 months. I'm trying to condense into about 8 minutes all of these conversations. So as we've already heard, we can think about the history of prisons and the sort of mass incarceration at this moment, the growth of prisons starting in the 1980s in the biggest sense in the US, as part of the counter-revolution of the movements from the revolutionary movements from the 60s into the 70s, right? And so I started getting involved in this issue in 2006 when there were the huge immigrant rights mobilizations, right? I was living in Los Angeles. Everywhere I went to around the country, these were the biggest mobilizations that had taken place ever on any sort of issue, was the immigrant rights mobilizations of 2006. In LA, there were 1 million of us. It was utterly stunning compared to, in terms of like the movement and the vitality compared to the anti-war movement, which was feeling increasingly desperate and depressing to me. And so, but I was also really, really concerned about the ways in which this next round of prisons, this next round of criminalizations was being resolved through this sort of line of, well, we're not criminals, right? So rather than sort of recognizing the previous ways in which prisons have been used in terms of anti-black racism to smash all of those movements, it was to take that up and say, no, 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 we're not that, we're not that. But there are all sorts of people who are trying to think around that idea and trying to mobilize in other ways without using that, that sort of understanding. So there are all of these cross-currents and contradictions and simultaneities. So, okay, what am I seeing? I'm basically seeing a lot of, I'm just going to call this defensive struggles. So they're all throughout from, you know, coming from here, all the way through the south and southwest. There are all sorts of places in which people are organizing to fight the opening of detention centers. A lot of times people lose. A lot of times people lose. And they lose because the things are already in the pipeline and nobody knows like where to even stop. Do you talk to the county supervisors who are sometimes asking for these prisons to come in, or do you go to the private corporation? I mean, this is a big question that a lot of people are struggling over. Do you go to the state? Is it Homeland Security? All the reorganization of all of the institutions themselves is causing there's a lot of just confusion, really, about who the target even is. And at the same time, you also see successful stoppages of prisons. They don't all get built, right? And people are sharing with each other ideas about how it is that they all don't get built. And some of the people who are doing some of the resistance, I wouldn't necessarily put on my team, right? Some of them have to do with wanting to keep out criminals, keep out immigrants, all this sort of thing. So it's not necessarily exactly what I want to see. At the same time, sometimes they're not getting built. You also see, so that's the sort of organizational capacity that you do see going on. At the same time, especially in places where, say, migration is the sorts of mass scale of migration from the 1980s on, in the South, for instance, in Mississippi or in Louisiana, the organizational capacity that people have isn't as well developed as, say, in New York City or Arizona, where it's super polarized, but there is a capacity that's built up. Part of what you're seeing, or even in upstate New York, where I used to live, is a real terrorism on a sort of everyday level, where people are very much afraid to come out, to be able to walk in the streets, much less organize or speak on their own behalf. Right? And so that's one thing that's incredibly frightening about the ways in which the amount of state violence that is being developed at this moment. In terms of state violence being itself a sort of illustration of the crisis of the state to do anything else but use violence. At the same time, it does work sometimes.